She's becoming a liability. Marcus, Danielle said, her voice crisp with irritation. She walks around this house like she's keeping an inventory. It's invasive. And honestly, that dress she wore yesterday? She looked like the help. She's reflecting badly on our brand. Marcus let out a weary sigh. I know, babe. I'll tell her to stay in the guest wing more. She's just old-fashioned. She doesn't understand the scale of what we're doing now. She doesn't need to understand it, Danielle replied coldly. She just needs to stay in the background. She acts like she owns Carter Legacy Events because she helped us get started 15 years ago. It's pathetic. At this point, she's basically our unpaid housekeeper. Just beyond the hallway, Evelyn Carter stood frozen, a pen suspended in her trembling fingers. Before we begin, tell me in the comments, if your own child treated you this way, would you walk away, or fight for the truth? And if you believe parents deserve respect, subscribe for more unforgettable family stories where justice always finds its way. The smell of rosemary-infused lamb and expensive champagne always hung in the air of the Carter household, but for Evelyn Carter, it smelled like cold coffee and broken promises. At 68, Evelyn moved through the expansive, sterile halls of her son's Atlanta mansion with a quiet grace that belied the exhaustion settling deep in her bones. She wasn't a guest here, nor was she truly family anymore. At least, not in the way that commanded respect. To Marcus and his wife, Danielle, she was part of the infrastructure. A fixture as reliable and invisible as the climate control system. Evelyn retreated to her small guest suite on the ground floor, a room that felt more like a barracks than a sanctuary. Her joints ached from a long day spent organizing the logistics for the upcoming Legacy Gala, an event she had essentially planned from scratch while Marcus played golf and Danielle curated her social media aesthetic. She sat at her small desk, her fingers tapping rhythmically against an old, leather-bound ledger, a habit from her days as a top-tier accountant. Evelyn squeezed her eyes shut. She remembered 15 years ago. She remembered the nights when Marcus had sat on her kitchen floor, weeping because the bank was foreclosing on his first storefront, his dreams shredded by poor management and bad luck. She remembered the way she had looked at her own retirement savings, the nest egg she had built through 30 years of meticulous, grueling work, and decided that her son's happiness was worth the risk. She had injected every cent into Carter Legacy Events, negotiated the predatory debt down, and taught him how to read a balance sheet until he could finally stop drowning. She had built a titan from a handful of dust, and in doing so, she had given her son the wings to fly away from the very woman who had forged them. A light knock on the door pulled her from the wreckage of her thoughts. The door creaked open, revealing Aaliyah, her 12-year-old granddaughter. The girl's eyes were wide, glowing with a genuine warmth that was rapidly vanishing from the rest of the house. "Grandma, are you working again?" Aaliyah whispered, slipping inside and closing the door softly behind her. Evelyn managed a tired, genuine smile, the tension leaving her shoulders. "Just finishing some notes for the gala. Sweetheart, why aren't you asleep?" Quote. Aaliyah sat on the edge of the bed, picking at the hem of her pajamas. "Mom and Dad are arguing again. About the money. They always argue about money. But they have so much of it. Why are they so unhappy?" Quote. Evelyn pulled the girl into a hug. Aaliyah was the only thing holding her here, the only tether to the family she had sacrificed everything to preserve. "People sometimes lose track of what matters. Aaliyah," Evelyn said softly. "They get so caught up in the size of the house that they forget who's inside it." "I think they're mean to you," Aaliyah said, her voice small but fierce. "I see it. You do everything. And they don't even say thank you. You're smarter than all of them." Evelyn felt a sting of tears behind her eyes. She reached out and touched her granddaughter's cheek. I'm just doing what I can to keep us together. Baby. That's what mothers and grandmothers do. But as Aaliyah left and the house settled into a heavy, suffocating silence, Evelyn looked at her reflection in the vanity mirror. She saw the lines of age, the gray creeping into her hair, and the remnants of a woman who had once had dreams of her own. Dreams of painting, of traveling, of living a life that wasn't defined by the ledger books of others. She picked up the ledger again. It wasn't just a record of expenses. It was a map of her own erasure. She had spent years holding the foundation of their lives together, thinking that if she was quiet enough, helpful enough, and invisible enough, they would eventually see her as more than a utility. She was wrong. Evelyn stood and walked to the closet, pushing aside her modest wardrobe to reveal a loose floorboard in the corner. Beneath it rested a heavy fireproof lockbox. She hadn't opened it in years, trusting her son implicitly, but the conversation she'd just overheard, the casual dismissal of her entire existence, had awakened an instinct she'd buried long ago. She entered the combination. The lock clicked. It sounded remarkably like destiny. Inside, nestled among fading photographs, was a thick envelope labeled Thomas Reed, attorney at law. She unfolded the documents with steady hands. They were legal, ironclad, and absolute. She had been a ghost in her own company for years. But as she scanned the clauses she had insisted upon back when Marcus was desperate and humble, a cold clarity washed over her. They hadn't just mistaken her for the maid. They had spent years betting she was too soft, too loving, and too devoted to her family to ever fight back. They were about to discover that the accountant hadn't merely kept their books. She had been holding the keys to the entire kingdom. And the silent partner was no longer going to be silent. The following morning, the tension in the house was thick enough to choke on. Marcus was downstairs, barking orders at the catering staff over his phone, his voice booming with the unearned bravado of a man who believed he was untouchable. Danielle was at the marble kitchen island, reviewing the seating chart for the gala on her tablet, her face twisted into a mask of perpetual dissatisfaction. Evelyn entered the kitchen to pour her morning coffee. She wore a simple, well-pressed blouse, her posture perfectly erect. As she moved to the counter, Danielle didn't look up. She didn't even acknowledge Evelyn's presence, merely sliding a stack of printed menus toward her. "The font on these is wrong, Evelyn," Danielle said, her tone clinical. "It's too formal. We need something bolder for the charity donors. Can you rewrite the descriptions and have them reprinted by noon? And the floral arrangements for table 12 are off. Fix those, would you? You have an eye for that sort of homey detail." Evelyn looked at the menus. She looked at Danielle, who was currently sipping a latte that cost more than Evelyn's first car. For the first time in 15 years, Evelyn didn't feel the familiar reflex to soothe, to fix, or to comply. She felt a strange, chilling sensation, the sensation of a predator realizing it had been playing the role of prey. "I'm afraid I can't do that, Danielle," Evelyn said softly. Danielle froze. She slowly lowered her tablet, her eyes narrowing as she looked at her mother-in-law. "Excuse me? Did I stutter? The gala is tonight. We need perfection." "I'm sure you'll find a way to achieve perfection on your own," Evelyn replied, her voice steady. She took a sip of her coffee, turning to face her daughter-in-law. "I have errands of my own today. Personal matters." Marcus walked into the kitchen just in time to hear the tail end of the exchange. He let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Errands? Mom, this is the biggest night for Carter Legacy events. You're the one who knows the vendor contracts inside and out. You can't just walk away because you're having a mood." Evelyn turned to her son. She saw the familiar lines of his face, the same face he'd had as a boy, now hardened by greed and superficial success. "It isn't a mood. Marcus. It's a resignation. I'm finished managing the logistics of your life. Marcus's face darkened, his brow furrowing in a mix of confusion and irritation. He stepped closer, attempting to assert his physical dominance. A tactic he'd learned worked well in boardrooms where family. Mom, we don't resign from family. You know how important this is to me. Don't be difficult just to get attention. Is that what you think I'm doing? Evelyn asked. Her eyes were sharp, analytical. She was looking at him not as a mother looks at a son, but as an accountant looks at a failing asset. I'm not looking for attention. I'm simply acknowledging that my services are no longer required here. In fact, I suspect I've overstayed my welcome in every capacity. Danielle let out a scoff, turning back to her tablet. Fine. If you want to be dramatic, but don't expect us to cater to you when you're bored with your little vacation. Marcus. Ignore her. She'll be back in line by 5 o'clock. She's just trying to exert some control because she feels left out. Evelyn watched them, a pair of architects of their own destruction, completely oblivious to the crumbling foundation beneath their feet. She didn't argue. She didn't defend herself. She simply turned and walked toward the door, leaving her coffee half finished on the counter. She spent the morning in the quiet, dusty office of Thomas Reed, a man who had known Evelyn since she was a junior auditor in the late 80s. He was the only one who knew that the Carter legacy wasn't built on a bank loan or a genius epiphany. It was built on a series of legally binding stipulations Evelyn had insisted upon when she put up her life savings. You're sure about this, Evelyn? Thomas asked, peering over his spectacles. He held the original articles of incorporation in his hands. This will trigger a full audit. It will stop the company in its tracks. They will lose everything if they haven't been keeping their house in order. They haven't been, Evelyn said, her voice devoid of malice. It was just a statement of fact. Marcus thinks the company is his toy. He's forgotten that it's a legal entity, and that entity has a structure he's been violating for years. I want the audit to be thorough, Thomas. I want every cent accounted for. They'll hate you for this, Thomas warned. Evelyn stood, her coat over her arm. She thought of the gala tonight. She thought of the way Marcus would introduce her as the help. She thought of the years of being a ghost, a servant, and a doormat in her own home. They already don't love me, Thomas, she said quietly. They just love the utility I provide. If I have to be the villain to finally be seen as a human being, then so be it. She left the office with a heavy but determined heart. The mask of the doting mother was stripped away, and for the first time in over a decade, Evelyn Carter felt the intoxicating, terrifying, and necessary weight of her own autonomy. She wasn't going back to the mansion. She wasn't going to the gala. She was going to wait for the storm to break. And for once, she was going to be the one holding the umbrella. The ballroom of the Starlight Plaza in downtown Atlanta was a masterclass in performative luxury. Chandeliers dripped crystal like frozen rain, and the air hummed with the soft, insincere chatter of the city's elite. Marcus and Danielle stood at the entrance, acting as the perfect pair. The handsome, charismatic CEO and his elegant, poised wife. But behind the scenes, the cracks were showing. Where is she? Marcus hissed, scanning the room for the third time in 10 minutes. He wasn't looking for his mother out of affection. He was looking for her because he realized, with a rising sense of panic, that he didn't know the password to the secondary server containing the guest list's high net worth donor details. She's probably pouting in her room, Danielle replied, though she adjusted her diamond necklace with trembling fingers. I'll handle the donors. Just keep smiling, Marcus. People are watching. The gala proceeded, a blur of clinking glass and forced laughter. Marcus gave his speech, A masterfully crafted lie about humble beginnings and self-made success that conveniently left out the woman who had liquidated her 401k to pay for his first commercial kitchen. Halfway through the evening, a prominent investor, Julian Vane, approached Marcus. He was a man who knew the industry well and had seen Evelyn many times at events over the years. A stellar turnout, Marcus, Vane said, swirling his scotch. Your mother isn't here? I was hoping to thank her. I've always said, the real genius behind the logistics of this company is her. I've never seen anyone reconcile a budget like she can. Marcus felt a vein throb in his temple. He plastered on his best, most patronizing smile. Oh, you know Mom. She gets overwhelmed by the crowds. She's just helping out at the house, doing some housekeeping and odds and ends. She doesn't really have a hand in the corporate strategy anymore. Danielle chimed in, leaning close. Exactly. She's at a stage in her life where she prefers the quiet. We try to keep her away from the stress. Vane raised an eyebrow, his gaze lingering on the catering staff. Is that so? I could have sworn she was the primary guarantor on your initial venture. Funny how memory works. Before Marcus could retort, a side door to the ballroom opened. The room didn't erupt in applause, but a hush seemed to ripple outward as Evelyn walked in. She wasn't wearing one of the modest, muted tone outfits Danielle usually forced on her. She was wearing a stunning, tailored suit of deep charcoal silk, the color of a storm cloud. She looked like exactly what she was, a woman of power, dignity, and unyielding resolve. She didn't head for the kitchen. She didn't head for the catering staff. She walked straight to the center of the room, accompanied not by her son, but by Thomas Reed. Marcus's blood ran cold. He recognized the man. He hadn't seen Thomas in years. Not since the early, desperate days when the attorney had drafted the survival plan for the company. Mom, Marcus said, his voice tight as he intercepted her near the main stage. What are you doing here? And why is your lawyer with you? This isn't the time. Evelyn stopped. She didn't look like a mother being reprimanded. She looked like a CEO surveying an asset. She glanced at the room full of their biggest clients and donors, then back at her son. It's exactly the time, Marcus, she said, her voice carrying clearly in the suddenly quiet room. I spent years being the help in your home and the ghost in your business. You and Danielle have been very comfortable using my resources while treating me like a servant. I think it's time we address the ownership of this empire in a more public forum. Danielle stepped forward, her face flushed with rage. Evelyn, get out. You're making a scene. You're a minority shareholder at best. And you have no, quote, I have 45% of the voting shares. Danielle, Evelyn interrupted, her tone clinical. She turned to the room, her voice composed and resonant. And as of 3 o'clock this afternoon, I have exercised my right to a forensic audit. My attorney has been filing the necessary injunctions to freeze the corporate accounts while we investigate the miscellaneous expenses that have been funneled through your personal offshore holdings. A gasp went through the room. Marcus looked as though he had been struck. He grabbed Evelyn's arm, but she didn't flinch. She simply looked at his hand until he recoiled. You're ruining us, Marcus whispered, his face ashen. No, Marcus, Evelyn replied, her eyes unshedding tears but filled with a profound, final sadness. I'm merely revealing who you already were. I didn't create this mess. I just stopped hiding it. As Thomas Reed stepped forward to distribute the initial findings of the audit to the board members present, the music stopped entirely. The house of cards that Marcus and Danielle had built on the foundation of Evelyn's sacrifice began to sway in the wind of the truth. And for the first time in 15 years, Evelyn stood tall, the weight of the company no longer crushing her. but finally belonging to her. The ballroom at the Starlight Plaza had transformed from a temple of status into a courtroom of cold reality. The silence was absolute, save for the rhythmic clacking of high heels as some of the city's elite began to slip toward the exits, not wanting to be associated with the rapidly sinking ship of Carter legacy events. Marcus looked around, his frantic eyes darting from face to face. He saw his business partners, the ones who had slapped his back only an hour ago, now pointedly looking at their phones or whispering into the ears of their assistants. The prestige he had cultivated like a rare flower was wilting in real time. "This is a mistake," Marcus stammered, stepping toward Thomas Reed, his voice cracking. "Thomas, you know me. We go way back. This is my company. My mother is." "She's confused. She's just old and tired." Thomas Reed adjusted his glasses, his expression one of professional detachment. "I'm afraid I'm acting on behalf of my client's explicit instructions, Marcus. And given the discrepancies I've found in the ledger, specifically regarding the consulting fees paid to shell companies registered in your wife's maiden name, I'd suggest you stop talking about confusion and start talking about liability." Danielle let out a sharp, hysterical laugh that sounded like glass breaking. She turned to Evelyn, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and venom. "You did this on purpose. You sat there for years, acting like the doting grandma, letting us spend that money, letting us build this life, just so you could pull the rug out from under us when it was at its peak. You're a sociopath, Evelyn." Evelyn didn't blink. She watched her daughter-in-law with a terrifying, calm clarity. "I watched you buy 3 luxury SUVs while you complained that I didn't deserve a new mattress. I watched you vacation in the Maldives on the company's dime while I spent my weekends cleaning the gala linens because you refused to hire a professional service. I didn't plan your greed, Danielle. I just provided the means for you to expose it." The atmosphere in the room was suffocating. Marcus, the man who had styled himself as an Atlanta Titan, now looked smaller than he ever had. He looked at his mother, searching for the soft, compliant woman who would have rushed to apologize, who would have begged for them to settle this in private. But that woman was gone. In her place was a survivor who had finally remembered the value of her own life. "Mom, please," Marcus whispered, his bravado finally shattered. "If you do this, we're finished. Everything we have, the house, the brand, the status, it's tied to the line of credit you personally guaranteed. If you pull your support, the bank will seize everything by morning. Then perhaps you should have treated the company and the woman who built it with the respect they deserved," Evelyn said. Her voice didn't waver. She turned away from him, her duty to the theater of the evening concluded. She caught the eye of Aaliyah, who was standing near the edge of the ballroom. The girl had been watching the entire exchange, her face unreadable. Evelyn felt a sharp pang of guilt, not for what she had done to Marcus and Danielle, but for the chaos that would inevitably spill over into her granddaughter's life. She walked over to Aaliyah, ignoring the cameras and the murmurs of the crowd. She knelt down, ignoring the ache in her knees, and took the girl's hands. "This is going to be a difficult time, Aaliyah," Evelyn said, her voice dropping to a gentle whisper. "But remember this, sometimes, when a building is rotten at the foundation, the only way to save the people inside is to tear it down so you can build something stronger. Something real." Aaliyah looked at her grandmother, then at her parents, who were currently being swarmed by legal representatives. She nodded slowly. "I know, Grandma. You aren't the one who broke it. You're just the one who finally turned on the lights." As security began to clear the room, Evelyn walked toward the exit. She didn't look back at the ruin of the Carter legacy. Behind her, she heard the raised voices of creditors and the sound of cell phones recording the final moments of a dynasty. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp. She took a deep breath. The first one she had taken in years that didn't taste like the dusty, claustrophobic life of a maid. The empire had fallen, and for the first time, Evelyn felt truly free. The fallout was swift and absolute. Within 72 hours, the Carter legacy name had been stripped from the marquee of the industry. The bank, having discovered the systemic financial abuse and the fraudulent misrepresentation of assets by Marcus and Danielle, moved to liquidate the company's holdings to recover their losses. The mansion was under notice. The luxury cars were repossessed, and the socialite circles that Danielle had clawed her way into closed their ranks, casting the couple into the cold void of irrelevance. Evelyn, however, had secured her own position long before the gavel fell. Her initial investment, protected by the ironclad documents she had kept in that fireproof box, was recovered. She was no longer the silent partner of a catering company. She was a woman of significant, independent means. She moved into a light-filled loft in a historic district of Atlanta, a space with high ceilings and north-facing windows that she had admired from afar for decades. It was the polar opposite of the sterile, suffocating mansion. Here, there were no menus to rewrite, no staff to manage, and no one to satisfy but herself. 6 months later, Evelyn sat at an easel, the smell of turpentine and oil paint replacing the scent of rosemary-infused lamb. She was painting a landscape of a garden she had once dreamed of tending. A place of vibrant, wild colors that defied the muted, professional palette she had been forced to adopt for so long. A soft knock at the door broke her concentration. She wiped her hands on a rag and walked to the entrance. It was Marcus. He looked different, humbled, perhaps, or merely exhausted by the weight of a world he no longer controlled. He wore plain clothes, and there was a noticeable absence of the arrogance that had defined his middle age. He held a small box of his belongings, looking like a man who had lost his way and was finally realizing he had no map. "I heard you moved," he said, his voice quiet. He didn't try to push past her. He stood on the threshold, a supplicant. "Aaliyah said you were doing well." Evelyn leaned against the doorframe. Her posture relaxed. She wasn't angry, but she wasn't a soft place to land, either. "I am doing well, Marcus. I'm finally living my own life." Marcus looked down at his shoes. "I'm working a retail job now. It's a lot different. I have to commute on the bus." Danielle left. "Mom." She took what she could and went back to her family. I think I finally see that I was the problem. I thought I was a CEO, but I was just a boy who refused to grow up." He looked up at her, and for the first time in 20 years, she saw her son instead of the mask he wore. "I don't want the money back. And I don't want the business. I don't want to be the person I was. Is there any room for me? Somewhere in your life?" Quote. Evelyn looked at him for a long moment. She thought of the years she had spent pouring her life into his, and the years he had spent treating her as a footnote. "There is room, Marcus," she said firmly. "But the dynamic has changed forever. I am not your manager. I am not your guarantor. And I am certainly not your maid. If you want a relationship with me, it must be based on equality and honesty. No more games. No more using me as a crutch." Marcus nodded, his eyes watering. "I understand." "Good," she said. "We can start with a coffee. Once a week. But you will have to earn the rest of the bridge back." Evelyn turned back to her painting. She wasn't being cruel. She was being clear. She had spent the better part of her life being a foundation for others, only to realize that a foundation serves no purpose if it is buried underground. She walked back to her canvas and picked up her brush. Beside her, on a small table, sat a framed photograph of Aaliyah, who visited every Sunday to learn how to paint. Evelyn smiled, dipping her brush into a vibrant, defiant shade of cobalt blue. She had reclaimed her time, her worth, and her voice. The story of the maid who saved the empire was over. The story of the artist who saved herself had only just begun. The message was clear for anyone who had ever felt invisible. Family should be built on love, not exploitation. The person who sacrifices the most is often the one everyone notices the least, but it is never too late to remember your value and reclaim the life you were meant to live.